Okay, so welcome to another Jenkins X Office Hours. There's not too much on the agenda today. There's one item. I think we're going to have a general discussion and kind of keep it fairly open. Everyone's had their heads kind of really buried trying to get the last leg, the final stint for getting a beta release for Jenkins X3. So I think we were going to try and have a bit of a recap where we are. Just a general discussion. It'd be good to hear anybody's feedback people are having. Hervé's joining in as well now, which is brilliant. And yeah, so there's no real kind of massive structure. Feel free to just jump in and have a discussion, ask any questions or share anything. Hervé, hi. Alrighty, so we have, there has been a massive push for ironing out the last major issues that we wanted to get done for alpha. I think we talked about this in the last couple of office hours. Where we are at the moment is more about removing things that we don't want to be taken into the beta. So that's any commands, any requirements, which is a particular topic, images, builder images, pipelines, kind of removing any technical debt that we don't want to be maintaining and could lead people down a bad path if they start building and using on top of it. So we're really, really close. There is an issue tracker. We've got a milestone on issues. The Git repo is under the Jenkins X org of issues. I can share my screen, or we can go and have a little look at it. I can start off by sharing a little something about the requirements change, and then I don't know, James, did you want to mention some of the stuff you've been working on, and other people can chime in?
Yeah, let's do that. Go for it.
All right, let's try this then. I'm going to share my screen. So, where are we? Forgive all the tabs. Issues. Not all of these are mandatory for the beta. Some of them are a bit more nice to haves. We really want to have a push to try and get the beta available by the end of this week. That's really our main push at the moment. So it is all hands on deck. If you are able to help, if you're being involved, then that's great. Even if it's just sharing thoughts or feedback on Slack, it's really all been so valuable. And it's been superb. This is the particular one, the current one I'm looking at. I've been looking at for the last few days. Terry, you hopefully will like this one as well, because you've been saying for a long time we should really version the requirements, the JX requirements. So just for anybody that's not familiar, Jenkins X traditionally from V1 had a CLI that took loads of flags that basically configured what things would be installed. Then with 2, we moved to more of the boot approach, so configure things with the Git repository and different requirements in the YAML file. With 3, what we're looking to do is, again, still keeping that declarative nature, having all of the requirements up front, but in a bit more structured way. And also removing any requirements that shouldn't be there. For example, anybody that's familiar with V2 will know things like boot repo or version stream URLs or Canico or GitOps flags. There was quite a lot in there that just, if you try to change it, it's not going to do anything. So we want to make sure that we're removing anything so the configuration that people are exposed to actually does what it says on the tin, and it's supported and maintained as well. And of course versioned as well. So we now are treating the requirements more as an API, so that is under the JX API repo. It's a bit of a challenge trying to migrate when you're removing things. Removing things is always difficult because you don't know what's going to break. Thankfully, with V3 code base, there's a large amount of unit tests, and the test coverage is really good. So we've been able to do this with a bit more confidence than perhaps we have been able to on previous versions of Jenkins X. A lot more confidence. Just very quickly, there's a little, and this is just something hacky. This isn't necessarily for people to use or anything, but it just shows the approach we're taking. We created a little converter really that kind of does some real simple in place changes that we can actually walk through a repo and replace the imports, for example, on Go imports. You can see some search in place, and also migrates the actual JX requirements. A lot of unit tests have JX requirements and they're using the old style. So just to look at what this actually means in reality, for anybody that's using it, let's have a little look. You're going to start to see what used to be something like this, where you see you've got these things here. Storage was a bit funky because you had to, they were actual hard coded backup logs and reports. So to be able to extend this, you wouldn't be able to. Various other things. Valero shouldn't be in there. It's more configured via Helm values now. So that will move, and what you'll see is something like this. So using the same CRD approach, structured approach, really has an API version, and it's removed everything that shouldn't be in there. So this is how you'll be able to configure your Jenkins X requirements for V3.
By the way, I love the environment section.
Yeah.
We've had these massive ingresses in there for like, I don't know, like a year for no reason, mostly. That makes the requirements look like 5 pages long. So just getting rid of all the stuff we don't necessarily need in the environment section is awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
is the TLS stuff going to change as well? Because obviously with V3 we had some pretty major TLS changes, didn't we? So I'm guessing that needs to be migrated as well.
Interestingly, it's going to be staying in as it is, and I was on the fence of how we should be using that. What Chris has done with the AKS stuff is he used those values, and also then made another value generated so that you can use conditionals in the Helm file YAML. So what that means is, yes, we're still going to use them, but they are now optional in that configuration. So while you won't just see them, that's why they were missing from when you looked there, but we will still use them to be able to enable TLS.
Okay, that's cool.
But it's one of the other things as well. We generate a schema for this, so we'll have IDE completion as well, and descriptions and stuff for IntelliJ. So it's going to be a lot clearer, a lot of that as well.
A lot of the migration stuff James started to talk about is more migrating code for Jenkins X plugins. You know, the Golang code that implements pipelines and whatnot. Mostly, the only thing you'll really notice as you're using Jenkins X is the requirements YAML will auto migrate when you do JX GitOps upgrade. But you won't really need to do anything. It will just the migration will just happen automatically.
And that is the interface. So that's what it's right. It should be. It's an API. It's right that it's going to be versioned. So we'll be able to handle backwards compatibility as well. But that is one of the reasons why we need to try and get that. We need to get that in and done for the beta, really. But that's going to be your interface for installing for configuring Jenkins X requirements, which is going to be good. And this was just some of the other stuff that goes for anybody that's actually developing on Jenkins X. We kind of start using these core v4 beta 1. It's a little bit confusing because the major version is for the API is 4, but they're going to go in 2 different version approaches. You can't make everything v3 because Jenkins X is v3. The major version for the JX API is 4 because there's some major changes. I'm sure there'll be a 5 soon, but that's not to affect the major version of Jenkins X, if that makes sense. You can't keep the 2 aligned. And that's pretty much it.
Stepping up one of the versions pretty majorly just to make people think that they're not aligned. Because I suppose running 3 and 4 in parallel, people are confused. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Yeah, because that's the reason I felt it needed to be said, because it seems like they're quite close. I noticed there's actually a big. Oh, sorry, go on, James. You were going to say something.
Go for version 10.
What 10? God. Yeah,
you could go for version 30, and then have the 10 be the minor version of the actual.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah, we could do that. Although that's more change. Yes, yeah, let's do that. I'll probably do that. Okay, yes. So that was really just a little bit of an update. So if you, we've got protection. We shouldn't be breaking anything. If you spot anything that doesn't look right, then please let us know, because we are doing this with the intention to handle backwards compatibility. We don't want to be breaking anybody. You shouldn't see any differences other than what we've shown you.
The upgrade stuff we've been using for the last few months has been working really well. For anybody who's been using V3, you just do JX GitOps upgrade whenever you want to upgrade to the latest version stream. And over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, we've made various changes, nothing like earth-shattering, but for example, we moved to the upstream tecton. We used to have a Jenkins X tecton, we moved to upstream tecton, which involved a different chart repository, which involved modifying the Helm file. A couple of weeks ago, we moved to the upstream chart museum. And again, it's a different chart repository, so the Helm file changed and then the version change. We've been managing to keep Jenkins X self-upgrading, and we've been testing this out with our production cluster that just auto-upgrades all the time using the latest versions. And it's been working really, really well. We've had a couple of times when it's nothing to do with Jenkins X per se, but Kubernetes gets a bit funky. Usually it's either Cert Manager or Tecton gets in a funky state where it's to do with finalizers or admission webhooks or something where you basically have to delete something because it gets in a funny state. And then it's all right again. But apart from that, that's the only thing we've seen, which is nothing to do with the upgrade process. It's more physically changing Cert Manager and Tecton can sometimes get in a funny state where you just need to delete something and then it goes. But generally, it's been really, because everything's so much simpler in V3, it's so much easier for us to do an upgrade mechanism. You know, if we suddenly introduce a new chart that's mandatory, or we decompose a chart into multiple pieces, or we move charts to different repositories, or in this case, we start versioning the requirements file, which means the YAML's a little bit different. We can automate all of this now in a really simple, clear way. Anybody can do JX GitOps upgrade. It doesn't commit anything, it just changes your local file system, so you can review all the changes, you can see what changed, why it changed. You can choose not to commit that change, you can cherry pick the changes and whatnot. So there's less magic going on, and because everything's so much simpler, more declarative, it has meant we've been able to do, you know, continuous upgrading. What we're hoping is once we get to beta, hopefully there's not much more to change. I mean, obviously versions are going to change, but we're hoping there's not going to be any, you know, fundamental source code layout changes. Hopefully, I mean, you can never can you? But hopefully, all the big changes. You know, we're Helm file 3, we're Helm file 3, we're on the latest Helm with the latest Helm file. Hopefully, nothing's going to be earth-shatteringly different by GA.
Having the core, this is why we kind of really focus on getting this beta out and done, because things aren't going to stop after that. There's going to be a constant drum of features coming out, but they will be done in the extensible way, easy to consume features that you'll be able to understand, well tested as well. So it's more about getting the core done and rock solid, and then you can put in these changes, these new features as and when they get released. So things like Istio was being talked about, and some of the other stuff that James has been looking at around Mink as well, and various other things. There's going to be Flagger and different integrations. It's just going to be a constant flow, but we just want to make sure that the beta is nil, and then that bakes for however long it needs to before we can get that GA. So probably won't be, as James saying, won't be changing much from the beta. It'll just be about making sure it's good for production workloads.
And hopefully things like, you know, Istio or Knative or whatever, any kind of ingress solution or load balancer, whatever you want to use, hopefully those kind of things shouldn't involve a change in Jenkins X, right? You can just use your Helm file to remove some charts, add some charts. Mostly, if there are charts, it should just work without changing Jenkins X, right? It's pretty flexible. One of the biggest challenges is things like Istio has no charts. So you can't just use Istio right now in Helm file.yaml. you have to distribute your own charts of Istio for some reason. So that's the only kind of thing that is a bit unfortunate right now. We can't easily show Istio and Knative and things like that. But I'm hoping, all the heavy lifting's done with, external secrets, and the way we're using Helm, and the way we're using values, YAML, Go template files, and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully that's just going to work. So far, it's working on all the clouds. It's working with all the different secret stores, whether it's Vault, whether it's the cloud providers, secret stores. That all seems to be working pretty much. We still need a little bit more work on Azure and the secret manager on Azure, but it's all looking like pretty rock solid. And it's just a case of, as James was saying, different integrations on top. So, different pluggable things for Knative or Istio or, other things we might want to plug in like Flagger. I was just going to mention briefly, it's not terribly exciting to look at per se, but I've been going through the pipeline catalogs, looking at pretty much every single image that's used anywhere, and trying to move basically to small images and away. We've traditionally used these massive builder images that have, kubectl and Helm and JX and Maven and a gazillion different tools in there. And we're trying to move to just using simple small images for each step. It's slightly complicated picking the right delicate balance between having 50,000 container images versus a small set of images that have multiple tools inside and so forth. So
yeah, one of the complications that we've noticed with the multiple separate files is when we need to pass something around for a build step. We found it a lot more difficult in Tecton because of the isolated images. So we need to pass a file down the chain and pass it to the next builder along. There's not a super easy way to do that.
There is actually.
Oh, okay.
/workspace. Just put anything in /workspace and every
/workspace and it'll just be carried over.
Yeah. So there's a quick answer for that one. Although the one thing that's unfortunate with Tecton, well, it's just a thing with Tecton. The one thing that's unfortunate is every time you use a different task, that's a different pod, and by default, the workspace isn't shared unless you do something funky. But if you just make one task with lots and lots of steps, and each step is a container image, right? So let's say you've got 10 steps, each step is a random container image, like one is Node, and one is Python, and one's Ruby, and one's whatever. All these different steps, if they're in the same task, running the same pod, and every step mounts /workspace. So any step can write to something in workspace. It could be any folder in workspace. And then the next step can just look in workspace. So you've got within a pod, within a task, you've got a really easy way of sharing output. So you could do, I don't know, Maven package, and then the next step can be a completely different image. You can look at the output of Maven package. Sorry, James, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, isn't it? I know it's not actually ideal because it's a bit slow, but even cross tasks, you get the PV mounted, don't you? I think, is that right?
No, the quick answer is no, you don't. I thought you would. You have to kind of do it yourself.
Right, okay.
Also, PVs kind of suck.
Yeah.
Basically, you need to decide how you're going to do state transfer between the tasks. And you could do anything. You could have a shared rewritable PV, and you could hope that multiple pods can read and write from that PV, which might work on your cloud, maybe. But it usually doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And so what you might end up doing is writing your own custom sync thing where you upload to a bucket in one task and then you download from a bucket in another task or something like that. So the quick answer is just use one task is a quick answer. Sorry, go on, Evan.
Maybe use a temporary GitHub account, repository?
Yeah. Okay, switching gears ever so slightly to talk about something totally different, but it's interesting because it's kind of related. There's an open source project called Mink, M-I-N-K.
Yeah,
Knative project. We were just talking about it on Slack earlier. And apparently Mink started because Knative has a command line called KN. And they had an image tool, so it was KNIM to do image building. And then do that backwards, that's Mink. So then somebody just, a guy called Matt just spun up this little open source project called Mink, which all it does is make images. It just makes images and then ties the image into the YAML so that you can do kubectl apply and things like that. one of the things Mink does is it assumes it's running on your laptop and it's going to build an image from what's on your laptop. So the first thing it does is it tars up the entire source directory and creates a container image with the source code from the file system inside, and then runs a task run separately. And the first step of the task run runs that container image that unpacks the tarball. So that was the thing that the Mink folks said. The easiest way of getting the contents from a laptop to another task is just create a container image of the file system. Turns out I can't get that to work at all on my GCP account. I have no idea what's wrong. There's some weird thing. I can't use it. So I've been using Git clones instead, which is great if everything's in Git, but it doesn't really work if things are on your file system. So I think in general, the Tecton ecosystem needs a range of tools for sharing state between laptops and pipelines or tasks and other tasks. But the quick recommendation is the easiest thing to do if you're doing pipelines, like pull request pipelines or release pipelines, just do a Git clone and then use one task. And if you need separate pipelines, use separate tasks. And then life's really simple because Git clones are usually fairly quick. But there are these other options you could look at, like using buckets and doing rsync and things like that, or creating temporary container images and chucking tarballs in there. It's a bit of a hot mess, unfortunately, and PVs generally suck across pods. But yeah, it's a bit of a hot mess. So the quick answer is, back to Tom's original question, try stay in one task and use lots of steps in the task, and just use the local file system, and everything works awesome. You have one Git.
So that's the root/workspace folder.
Yeah.
I'm just making that change right now, so.
I think wasn't there another one as well, Tecton Home as well, maybe? I think it might get shared, or I can't remember.
Yeah, so Tecton Home is intended more for home files like .git config and git credentials and those kind of things. I mean, technically you can chuck stuff there, but the tradition is workspace is where you git clone things and you build things, and you know, that's your workspace where you generate content. And then the home directory is where you could store Git or Docker tokens or NPM tokens and that kind of crap. But yeah, so workspace is always shared. You can have many folders within workspace, and it's just an empty dir in the pod. So it's all the steps, init container and all the steps can mount it and see it and everything. Tecton automatically mounts workspace into every step. So if you just define a bunch of steps in the task, each step will have workspace mounted already. You don't have to do anything special. You can mount other volumes of yourself using the Kubernetes volume and volume mount. So if you want to mount a PV or a config map or a secret or something like that, you can do that as well. But if you just want a place to, you know, create tarballs and images and compiler outputs, workspace is the place. In Jenkins X, we've always used workspace/source, which is our own kind of convention we started a while back, which isn't mandatory. You can change that to something else. I've noticed Mink just assumes it's /workspace, and then inside there is the Git clone of the project. But you sometimes want to do multiple Git clones, right? Sometimes you, for example, when we build a website, we might clone the JX repository and we clone the documentation website in another directory when you do things. So you'd have multiple Git clones inside the workspace. But yes, workspace is the easy way to share content between steps.
That's perfect. Yeah, I wonder if there's some use for an FAQ on that, because a lot of the time when people are picking up the Jenkins X3 stuff, they're almost new to Kubernetes, and so a lot of I can remember when we first started with V1, I didn't even know how to make two services talk to each other, and it's like a lot of those basic steps without the Kubernetes expert knowledge, you're sort of a bit lost with that. And Tectons, you know, a lot of people haven't heard of Tecton maybe that are using V3 or V1 even. Yeah,
no, as soon as the beta's out, I'd love to write just how to write pipelines with Tecton doc, because it's surprisingly deep. I love Tecton, it's awesome, but it's surprisingly deep to figure out how to even use it right. I was quite shocked. I tried to write reusable tasks that I could share. I thought, let's write a Git clone task, and let's reuse a Git clone task using task refs. And that's terrible, because then you have to you do a Git clone, and then you have to copy all the content of the Git clone to a PV, so then you can run another task that then loads the PV when you could just do a Git clone in every task. So I think there's lots of best practices we should be sharing about how to use Tecton well and how to compose things. Like, for example, try use a single task when you can. One thing we found on Jenkins is Tecton, assuming you'd write a really big pipeline with many, many tasks, and you'd have this huge, complicated kind of DAG of tasks and parallel steps and all this kind of stuff. When we start to use Prow tends to just have lots of parallel, a bit like GitHub checks. You have lots of parallel pipelines. So you do one pull request and 3 pipelines might run, or 10 pipelines. It's easier to have a lighthouse trigger per task and just have lots of parallel tasks. One could do pull request, one could do code coverage, one could do a preview environment, one could run your unit test, one could do linting. Just have them as separate tasks, do a git clone and then a bunch of steps. Keep things simple. That seems to be a really happy path. I'm not saying that works for every use case or anything, but I'm just saying that feels like the default is have a trigger and a task with multiple steps and have many triggers. And then if you need something more complicated, you could always trigger another pipeline from your pipeline, if you see what I mean. You could run JX pipeline start inside a pipeline to kind of fork into multiple pipelines. But yeah, to cut a long story short, we definitely need a guide on good best practices for using Tecton, because it's not obvious, I think. But we're all learning all the time.
That is what, I mean, the way the V3 docs on the website have been structured now is set up for exactly those kind of guides. So it would be a case of any other suggestions or anything like that, it'd be, shout them out and we can start getting more people adding to them and contributing to them.
Yeah, I agree with what Hervé said in the chat. Maybe even like one of the videos that you do, where you just go through, because a lot of the time you only cover setting up a cluster, but maybe if you did something like, maybe even if you showed you setting up your docs website and doing your docs website and doing the git clone in there with a thing and just showing, editing the pipelines and talking about some of the intricacies there and making them talk to each other and stuff. That'd be an amazing video to be able to watch and see how it worked and stuff.
Yeah.
We need better, more complicated examples as well, I think. Like multiple microservices sharing a database and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I know Terry does the machine learning stuff, doesn't he? And we've had loads of instances where like we need to create PV and we need to pull down images here and there, and we need to carry over tokens because we need to pull things from repositories and that sort of stuff, especially ML where it's so complicated in Kubernetes, because you can't just have a dedicated machine with 20 GPUs and you've got to containerize it and wrap it up nicely.
Definitely. Well, one thing that's kind of related that I got sidetracked rambling about Tecton. We've been going through basically the pipeline catalog and looking at all the images. I'll just do a very, very brief kind of noodle in the current pipeline thing. Let me share my screen. I'll turn my video off because my internet's not brilliant. I'll share my screen. See if this works. Can you see browser?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So this is the default pipeline catalog. Actually, one other thing that traditionally we used to have one pipeline catalog for non-Docker images and non-Helm charts. We're trying to just align on a single pipeline catalog that can conditionally work with 0 to many container images and 0 to many charts. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting kind of close. Just to make it easier than having gazillions of pipeline catalogs to make life more complicated. But one of the things we've recently been doing is going through, let me pick an example, JavaScript. If we look at the pipelines for JavaScript, now this is Tecton, so it's going to be kind of fairly verbose. But this is the pipeline, the release pipeline for, so it's 99 lines, although the bottom one isn't really a line. It's like 98 lines of YAML. We've recently been going through all of these images, and let me highlight a few of them. So when we're running npm install, we're now just using vanilla Node. So there's no weird custom builder. We're not taking Node and then chucking in some JX binaries or anything like that. We're just using vanilla images. So that if you want to use a specific flavor or different variety of Node, you just change that one string and you're good to go. So we can avoid having this huge maintenance burden of trying to make a gazillion numbers of permutations of images. People can just use any image they like for any step. And we've been going through all the images trying to pick the smallest possible image we can find for each step. Another thing we've been kind of doing, now you might look at this and go, oh, that's quite a lot of stuff there. We've been trying to make everything very explicit. So trying to move away when we can from these complicated JX binaries that do lots of magic, that when it's relatively simple, we try and do it kind of in line. The thing that's slightly complicated is sometimes things are really complicated and you do need some kind of step to help. But for example, here we're creating a new version. So we're using this tool to create the version and we're just writing it to a file. So if you want to use a different file, you just edit that line. We've started using this script notation quite a lot in Tecton, which at first doesn't seem a big deal, but the really simple thing is you can just edit this. So if ever you want to create a new environment variable before this step, you just edit this block of text and add more environment variables. If you want to run a command before this step or after this step, you just add a new command. If ever you were trying to diagnose things, just add a sleep and you can keep ctlexec inside and so forth. So even though using bash and shell looks wrong, it feels so right when you start working with Tecton, because it just makes everything kind of explicit and easy to tweak. So for example, we're using sed to replace a bunch of values in files. Now, if you want to use a different tool to do that, just swap that step out and do something else. It's no big deal. But at least you can see exactly where this is happening and how it's happening and which files it's changing and all that kind of stuff. So if ever any of these lines you want to comment out, just comment them out, whatever, or change them and stuff like that. We've finally got rid of one of the last images this morning. We've got the changelog image now, which is using the V3 plugin. So that's a small container image that just has JX changelog inside. So we don't need any of the V2 images now by default. So everything's V3, everything's using the latest, greatest client Go. By default, we don't include things like, there's no Helm 2 binaries lying around in these images or anything like that. We've also started using this image quite a lot, JX boot, which came up on Slack today. And we've got an image for promote, JX promote, and we've got an image for preview, JX preview. And both of those two are using JX boot as well. JX boot is a multi-architecture container build, which only includes Jenkins X and the binary plugins we need to boot. So it's got like JX GitOps and JX secret and JX verify, I think. So it's got a couple of plugins in there, but just the plugins we need to boot things. So it's a pretty small container image, but it's built with a multi-architecture, so it should work fine on ARM and various other architectures and things like that. And similarly, the promote and the preview are similar commands. So we're trying to make everything multi-architecture for those people who at some point are going to move to ARM, which if you're on Amazon, you're probably going to increasingly use more and more ARM going forward because it's cheaper. But certainly in Asia and China, people are using lots and lots of ARM. But that's it, yeah. So we're moving to lots of small container images. One day we might use something instead of this. We might one day move to Mink instead of the explicit Canico, just because the explicit Canico can only handle one container image. It can't handle 2 or 0. So we'd like to make Helm charts and container image building handle silently 0 to many without you having to kind of hack Tecton. But other than that, everything's fairly simple. I mean, I know it's YAML and it's not the most concise in the world, but it's reasonably simple. Actually,
while we're on this, could you just one of the things that I don't quite understand yet is the JX variables.sh.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure what that does.
That's a great question. Let me show you a quick start I'm working on. 536, and I can show you an example of how it's being used there. Let me just check. I've done a release fairly soon. If I look at a release that I've done, so this is just a Node.js quick start. If I look at this version 1.0.15, and if I look in the JX directory, we check in a variables.sh file. And these are the variables that get generated. So let me step back slightly. I'll jump to the bit quick. We have a step called JX variables here. That's a bit bigger. So I have a single step called JX variables. Now you might think, why the hell are we even doing this? You can define environment variables in in Tecton. So in Tecton, you can define environment variables and everything, which is, you can. The problem with Tecton environment variables is you can't create an environment variable in one step and share it in future steps. So for example, here we're generating a new version number. So until this step runs, we don't know what version we're about to release. So we're running a step in a pipeline to decide the version number, and we're writing to a file. This JX variables then looks at the file system, finds this version file, and then creates an environment variable called version, so that if any future step sources that file, so let me do here, if we source JX variables.show, we now have an environment variable for Canico flags and the version of the container image we're about to build here. So we've always had this challenge of how do we make it easy so that anybody can define environment variables for any step? But there's also this other challenge with Tecton is how there's no way to share environment variables that are defined within a step with other steps. So this JX variables file is just something we've started to use as an easy way of defining canonical variables, such as what's your Docker registry? What's your Docker registry org? What's your chart repository? If you're using Mink, what's your service account? What's the image that you're going to be building? What kind of pipeline are we in? What's your repository? What's your version? What's the build number? Where's the Docker file? So it's a bunch of kind of canonical environment variables. Now, if ever you want to define these yourself, like you don't like that Docker registry, and you want to just write your own file, you can just make a file called .jx variables in Git and define any of these variables. And the JX GitOps variables writes any generated files at the top of the file, so that any file, any environment variables you actually define yourself or override anything JX GitOps variables does. So to cut long story short, this is a simple way that we can generate a bunch of default environment variables programmatically by looking in config maps, by looking in your JX requirements to find out what your chart repo is or whatever. So we can generate default environment variables. They're versioned and checked into Git whenever you do a release, so you can see what they were that we used to make the release. And if ever you want to change them, you can just change them. And then if ever you want to override them, you could add a step after here that just explicitly sets the environment variable. So you don't even have to touch that step. But by default, this file is used to share environment variables between steps, basically. So that's the main thing it's used. And mostly that's for the version number, because we tend to need the version number. We need the version number to do the Canico build, we need to do the Helm chart, we need to do the changelog. So we need the version number a lot. It's not quite so useful, but we do tend to want a bunch of other environment variables, like what's the Docker registry and what's the registry organization.
That makes a lot more sense. Thanks for clearing that up.
So this is another thing that should go in that guide. Like we use this magic file. You can make your own file, obviously. You know, if you wanted to configure a bunch of environment variables that you might want to change dynamically within the pipeline for machine learning, for example, that's got nothing to do with Docker registries and versions. You could write your own file like this, right? We just picked a default one that you can use if you want, or just ignore if you don't want to. It's totally up to you.
Can we define a variable file for an environment or a cluster?
Right now, this environment variable, this file is per repository. So this is in a quick start, or a Node.js app or a Golang thing. This file is used within that pipeline to implement a pull request, to implement a release pipeline. We could grab values from dev, staging, production and put them in a file on disk as a step if somebody wanted. We kind of do some of that already. This step, the JX GitOps variable step, it does actually look in the development environment to look in the JX requirements file to find out what your chart repository is. So this environment variable is actually defined, let me just dismiss that. that environment variable and actually this and this. Okay, all those three come from your requirements, your development environment.
I was thinking about the domain name to be added in this.
Yeah. So if you wanted to, we could do the same. We could modify JX GitOps variables to automatically add ingress as an environment variable. You could write a custom step to do that. Because domains tend to be specific for each environment, you might have one domain for development, one for testing, one for staging, one for production or something. If you're releasing a new microservice, you might not want to hard code the domain name in it. You might want to, dynamically inject it via Helm when you deploy it. But it might be nice to include the default so that there's a default domain name or something. But yeah, we absolutely could do that. We just haven't done it yet. So yes, when we do previews, actually, if I show you the preview, let me look at the preview pipeline. The preview pipeline does something a bit more like you're suggesting, this preview create. The preview create actually does a git clone of the development environment and grabs out the JX values YAML so that when this runs a Helm, it runs Helm sync to deploy the preview environment. And that passes in the YAML from development. So things like the domain name, the subdomain, if you're using TLS or not, what buckets you're using, all that kind of stuff is all usable in the preview chart. So we kind of do something like that in the preview environment, but we could make that a generic thing. Actually, Kaneko flags is another example of why these environment variables are kind of handy. Usually, most people don't have to specify Kaneko flags at all. But if you're using, say, a container registry that's on premise that doesn't have TLS, you need to add all these Kaneko flags to disable TLS verification, or you might need to disable the certificate verifications and stuff like that. Now, it might be you want to just define these Kaneko flags globally in a config map, which is what we tend to do by default. But it could be that you've got some repositories are using a different container registry for some random reason. So sometimes these Kaneko flags could differ on a per repository basis. So using this simple mechanism, I know it's kind of complicated to explain, but using this simple mechanism, using this simple file, it means you can override Kaneko flags in any repository you like, and you can centrally manage those flags. So you can inherit the Kaneko flags on every quick start and import you ever make, but you can also opt out on a per repository basis. So yeah. Okay. Technically, it's surprisingly tricky to use well. So yeah, this is more learnings from doing Tecton well.
Cool.
Any more questions on pipelines and images and steps in Tecton?
Yeah, I've tried to add a Jaeger to my cluster, and its secrets were automatically converted to external secrets. But since they didn't exist before, and I didn't know before installing Jaeger which one it would be, most of the things failed because the secret didn't exist. How can we the manipulation of external secret is not it's not really clear for me. So something like that which are frustrating.
Yeah, I think there's two guides we're desperate for as soon as the beta's out. One is how to write pipelines and work with pipelines well and use Tecton well and so forth. Use shared state on disk, shared environment variables, use tasks rather than pipelines if you can, and those kind of things. So that there's using Tecton well, I think we need a guide for that. And we definitely need a guide for using secrets well, because secrets are surprisingly complicated. Even though on paper using Kubernetes external secrets, and secrets sounds easy, it's kind of complicated. And guides on how to deal with adding new secrets from scratch, or adding charts that have secrets that you want to use external secrets for them, or using secrets in pipelines. I think there's a whole bunch of areas there which we should be able to build some decent docs that walk through all of that. For example, we've added, as part of the refactoring for the JavaScript build pack, we talked about this the other day about should we use the JX step secret token thingy. I've forgotten the name of the step now. But there's a step that
JX step credential. It's used there.
Yeah. We've used a step in V2 that used to copy a secret to the file system, basically.
It's used in some pipeline, in some pack, I think. Let me see.
So it used to be in the JavaScript pipelines, and I removed it and replaced it with an explicit volume mount. One thing I didn't realize is volume mounts can be optional. So you can define secrets that you would like to mount if it existed, or in this case, an NPM token. So we can go through, and every time we think there should be a token, whether it's for Maven, whether it's NPM, Gradle, SBT, like whatever the tool is, we could just define a secret with a name and then document it, whatever, and then have a documented way to populate the secret, using a command line or something, or using GitOps and stuff.
One of the advantages as well that has is by mounting them in, if you can reduce the permissions that the service account that's running the pipeline. In an ideal world, it would be good for the service account not to have permission to go and look at secrets within that namespace. Just because then somebody could write something in the pipeline when they run builds, you could go and grab the secret and then post it somewhere or something, print it out in the log or something. So having them explicitly mounted is a volume in the pipeline. You can also then, it's clearer to review and maybe even have just administrators to allow approvals under anything under Lighthouse, for example. It's just a better way to be able to control.
Yeah. I think long term as well, there's, what's that spec called? The CSI volume thingy. There's a CSI volume thingy in the Kubernetes ecosystem that eventually, someday, we'll all have a canonical way of mounting secrets just straight to the file system without using a Kubernetes secret. So eventually, like long term, it's going to take a while for this to kind of roll out in all the different Kubernetes platforms and whatnot. But eventually, we could avoid mounting a secret via a secret. We could mount a secret kind of via Vault, via disk, or via whatever your secret manager is. So getting into the habit of using volumes for secrets, I think, is good practice, because I think eventually there are always going to be volumes somewhere on the file system, and with different permissions and whatnot. And fine, because once we move to a more volume-centric approach, one of the downsides with Kubernetes secrets is RBAC is based on namespaces. So either you can see the secrets in namespace or you can't. You can't say you can see this one secret, but you can't see the other secret in this namespace. So you have to go use many namespaces if you want fine-grained Kubernetes secret access, which is kind of a bit of a pain. Now, can you mount a secret in another namespace? I'm not sure if you can.
I don't know if you can. You can't mount it. I don't think so. No.
Yeah. So I think eventually, long term, we'll probably go more volume-centric for secrets. Eventually, but unfortunately, Kubernetes external secrets doesn't support that yet. But hopefully, eventually, it does.
Cool. That's so we've got 8 minutes left. There's on that particular one here. We've started tracking. I was mentioned about the issue tracker. I've popped it in the chat here. We can put it on Slack as well. But it's not to really forget about all the V2 issues that were attached to the JX repo. We know we're going to go through those and kind of start looking. Once we get the beta out, we'll start reviewing those and start pointing to where things would be resolved in V3. But to keep it a little bit cleaner, we've got the issues repo. If you've got these guides, we're going to be starting to go work through all of these once the beta is done, all these guides. So maybe plus one, any ones that you feel are higher priorities, and add some more in yourself, please. And then look out, and we'll get people reviewing them as well and contributing more. So yeah, that repo there is for the V3 stuff. Any feedback as well? We want to try and get better practice of moving some of the discussions from Slack, but onto issues that we can track any issues there as well. One last thing I was going to say was the next office hours would be in 2 weeks. Now I'm thinking a lot of people are going to start finishing up for the end of the year. So it might be that this one may be the last one of the year. Maybe we can do an impromptu something next week if we get the beta out this week. Maybe I don't know how that sounds to people. What do people think there?
We should have a Christmas party.
Yeah,
that's within a week.
Yeah, right. Anybody who's in a US time zone might be greeted with a coffee. Don't get upset if there's a beer on the table here. Maybe we can still do it in the US time zone. Should we try? Maybe we can try and find out a day next week where we can try and get to do an impromptu. We'll try and organise that then.
A Christmas beta party.
Yes, and to celebrate the beta being released. All right.
Good to me.
Look forward to that then. Okay, keep your eyes peeled for notification around that then. And yes, I think anybody else that's anything else? We've got 5 minutes left.
Well, I don't know. I have some issues.
Okay, well let's go for it. Let's see what we can do.
Well, you know, so. I don't even really know where to start, honestly, you know, so I'm learning JX as I'm learning Kubernetes and OpenShift, right? And so I just don't have a lot of insights into what's going on. And so I've had a lot of interaction on the chat with you guys about the image polling thing. And I think I've got a pretty good handle on that. I don't really know, like I've done some experimentation with Podman and using service accounts, credentials externally, and I thought I would prove that I was able to pull the image from using the JX staging service account and pulling the image from the JX namespace. But perhaps the test that I did with Podman, maybe that wasn't very accurate. I don't really know, because then I tried to do a deployment manually in JX staging of my demo app, and it did the same thing. It ended up in an image pull loop back off, whatever, you know, it couldn't pull the image. And so I'm working with my team on that, and I've got a meeting with them scheduled tomorrow to look at some things. And in conversations, they're suggesting that perhaps, like, I don't understand why the documentation in OpenShift doesn't work as stated, because it seems really clear that it's saying, look, follow these instructions and you'll create a role that will give every service account, perhaps if that's the way you configure it in JX staging, the role to pull the image that was created in JX, right? And that's really straightforward. It seems like it should work, but it doesn't. My teammates said that what they've had to do is they've had to tag the image with, so it's tagged right now with /JX/ project image name, whatever, right? And then the whole prefix with the local registry, port 5000, yada yada, right? So perhaps that it's just an issue of tagging it with JX staging instead of JX, and then that enables the image to be pulled.
I do seem to remember there's something to do with that. It needs to be named the same as the namespace.
Yeah.
I mean, I hit the same issues you hit, Troy. I was trying cloud native containers or whatever they call it these days.
Yeah, the code ready containers, I think.
That's it, code ready container, like the new Minishift thing. And I hit exactly the same issue. Yeah, I don't know maybe the tagging thing works, but then it's kind of weird that to use an image in different namespaces, you have to tag the image with every namespace you can imagine ever needing.
I know, right. I think that the other solution is the way it should be done. Get a role for every for every namespace that is going to need to pull those images. That seems like the right way to do it. And I don't know how to, I don't know, maybe I'll get some insights on that tomorrow. But so that's just one issue though. Then there's this other issue now with the JX boot pipe, the pipelines there, they're failing every time now. And it's related to a bucket repo issue. And I posted some message on the chat about that. And I don't know, it seems maybe coincidental with, I was talking with you about there was an issue with master versus main on the GitOps repo for the quick start. And you said, oh, there's this quick workaround, just create a master branch. And so I did that, and things kind of seem like they work, but when I go back and look at the timeline, perhaps that's when the whole bucket repo thing started failing. I don't know.
Try. Did you test it with GitHub repo?
Did I do what with it?
Try with GitHub repo instead of Bitbucket, just for a test.
I'm not sure. Instead of Bitbucket, I'm not sure.
Oh, you didn't speak about Bitbucket? Sorry,
No. I'm on GitHub.
Sorry, I forgot about Bitbucket. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it was I think I remember you hit an issue with, I think JX preview assumes the branch is master. That's on my list to fix before beta, actually, just to double check we can do a preview in a main branch rather than the master branch. Yeah, so I'll double check on that before we do the beta.
Well, is it worth trying to post to the channel what the thread you're tracking this on, Troy, and we can maybe try and follow up a little bit more on there, and we can see some of the errors. I don't know which thread that is, but I mean, we could try and get some more eyes on it.
So I'll post a message to it and have it reflect back to the channel. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. I'll do that.
Just like yourself, I followed every doc I could find on OpenShift of how to make this work, and it never worked.
I know.
So if we could get an answer from Red Hat, how are we meant to do multi-namespace deployments?
Yeah. I mean, we have them working.
Tagging is the way, let's do it, but I'd like to know what the way is meant to be, and then we implement it, rather than just we're all guessing and.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, exactly. The docs say you just need to roll, but the docs lie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll post those back to the channel, and then if I find out some stuff tomorrow, I'll let you guys know what I figured out there too.
Yeah, keep us posted.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So, if there's nothing more, I noticed there was something new just pop up. Dan Hall, hello, nice, welcome, glad you joined. But yeah, hello. Sorry to pick on you there, just thought to say hello.
It's nice to be here. Just wanted to say we've been using JX, I guess, yeah, been really enjoying it. It's a bit of a fast-paced thing to keep up with. I think there's a lot of stuff going on. It's actually James, it's your presentation at DevOps in 2008 that put me onto it, and it's taken a little bit of time for me to get an opportunity to get paid to use it. So it's finally got an opportunity. So yeah, no, it's going well.
Awesome. Keep us posted how you get along and any feedback as well.
We're doing like we've got a mono repo, so it's a bit of a challenge. I think we're trying to bend it into possibly directions that it's not necessarily been designed to use for initially with the JX2 anyway. Looking forward to JX3 and then being able to use native Tecton. I think that will help us.
Awesome. Were you the mono repo question earlier?
No.
Right. Oh, sorry, coincidence.
No, I did have a question, but just quickly, if anyone can quickly give me a heads up on. So my understanding is that the Lighthouse webhook picks up the webhook from GitHub, and then is it the JX controller then that schedules the Tecton pipeline? What I'm not clear is where I'm trying to do something with a scheduler at the moment so that only certain branches get built. And I was trying to dig around. I'm not particularly brilliant with Go code anyways, but if someone could point me roughly in the right repo so I can start looking at how that works, that would be useful.
And is this V2 or is it V3?
Yeah, it's version 2. Yeah.
Just because this changed a little while ago in Lighthouse. So Lighthouse changed to decouple triggering the pipelines. It had a Jenkins X specific engine, and then there's a Tecton. In V3, we've actually gone with the Tecton engines, and then Lighthouse is just vanilla Tecton now. There's nothing Jenkins X specific. With Jenkins X V2, I'm trying to remember how it all works now. We tend to trigger the meta pipeline.
That's right, yeah.
And the meta pipeline that decides what's the real pipeline going to be. Yeah.
So is it the meta pipeline that I should be looking at that should be taking into account the schedulers then?
Yes, so in V2, the schedulers generate the config for Lighthouse.
For Lighthouse, yeah.
So whenever you mess with the schedulers, you can look at the output by looking at the config map called config and the config map called plugins. It's a huge monstrous blob of YAML, but that's basically the configuration of Lighthouse that Lighthouse is going to use. With V2, we did find sometimes you had to reboot Lighthouse sometimes because it sometimes got out of whack. You could change the config. Lighthouse isn't always quite in sync. So if ever you're unsure, just bounce the Lighthouse pods to be sure. This all works great now in V3. V3, we've got a slightly different default where rather than having these monstrous config maps that are hard to even read, we've tried to move the Lighthouse config into each repo. So each repo can define what its triggers are, what its plugins are. We found if ever you wanted to like add a new pull request or add a new test case to one of your repos, having to configure everything in this monstrous central repo got quite daunting. So we've tried to decouple it so that each repository can define its own triggers, which means you just look in the repo you care about and you see their triggers. But for the stuff you're looking at, basically just look at the config map for Lighthouse, config and plugins for Lighthouse.
Okay.
That's the thing that the schedulers make. So if ever you do something with the scheduler, look at the output to see, does it define what you think it should?
I think I have looked at that in the past, and it seems to be broadly as I'd expect it to be. I noticed in the chat you mentioned perhaps using labels might be a better way about going about this.
Yeah, lots of people have got, I almost said this on the Slack, but I kind of lost track of time, but a lot of people have got quite confused with pre-submits and Prow and Lighthouse. A lot of people have mentally thought of release branches. Normally, pre-submits trigger on any pull request, usually. And so it's usually rare to have naming rules on pre-submits because usually any developer can make a pre-submit on any branch at all. If you go into GitHub and you edit something in github.com and you create a branch, it just usually picks a branch for you. And usually the branch patterns are used on releases where you say, I'm only going to release from these regular expressions or whatever. A few people, by the way, have missed that if you literally just want the main or master as your release branches, you have to do a regular expression for beginning of line before main. Because often people would have main somewhere in the string and that would release. So a word like main is often used, add the domain name could be a branch name.
Yeah.
So that's a common gotcha, which is more about post-submit stuff. But yeah, I did wonder, usually the way people use Prow and Lighthouse is you always run, you either configure a pre-submit to always run or never run. It's always run true or false. And then if it's false, you run it using chatbots when you want to run it. And then you can use regular expressions to enable and disable it anyways. And then you can use the owners file to decide who automatically triggers the pipelines. So depending on who creates the pull request, it runs. You could try regular expressions as well for the branches.
That's what I've tried, but it seems to have basically blocked anything running now. I actually ended up putting the target branch in, and now they seem to be building, but I haven't done enough playing around with it to find out if they're all building or some of them are building, or it seems almost like the target branch might be the thing that's being considered there.
Yeah, I've certainly never used branch patterns on pre-submits.
Yeah, there's a boring organizational reason for that, unfortunately.
Okay. But I did wonder, like, labels are sometimes easier.
Yeah.
You can programmatically add a label. You can add a label after a PR has been. Like, I always find branch patterns are very hard to work with, whereas labels, anybody can add a label. So, you could see a pull request from a colleague and go, oh, they've used the wrong branch pattern. I'm going to add the label to trigger this thing. You could just add a label using chat, using GitHub. So I find labels are generally easier if you're trying to,
Yeah, I think labels could work. I think, on the whole, we don't want PRs to schedule a build for everything, or for everyone, I should probably say. But it might be useful occasionally for the people that we don't want doing it to do it. And I think labels probably would provide a good way of doing it. So I'll have a go with that. Thank you.
And remember, you can just do always run false. And then they never run until somebody says /test name of the pipeline. So in other words, don't run it until someone comments on the pull request to trigger it. And that person has to be in the owners file.
Just a quick question of something else that I've seen in the scheduler. So I've seen reporting as a thing as well. Is that basically that the chat ops will work, but the initial output doesn't go to the PR? Is that how it works, the discussion?
I'd have to double check the code. I think reporting means, does it report to GitHub the pull request that the pipeline is running?
Okay.
I think
it is.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah. But the
I don't know why you'd ever not want to report, to be honest.
So it's to kind of put a little bit of sort of more meat on the bone. We have several organizations using the same code base. We have a fork of the code base, and what I would like to happen is that when we generate a PR from our fork into the master, then it generates a pull request, and the build process is kicked off by that. But I don't want it to interfere with the other organizations also using that code base. So it's kind of an edge case, you want to say.
It might be easier to do, rather than a pre-submit, it might be easier to do that as consider it a release, so that whenever you push to your magic branch, it does a release pipeline, which then does whatever you want it to do. Just because pre-submits with patterns seems to confuse people. I'm not even sure if it totally works in my house, I'm proud to be honest. Whereas we definitely know it's easy to pre-submits with names. So post-submits with name patterns, that totally works. Okay. So it might be easier to do a post-submit pipeline, if you see what I mean. So you can still do a pull request pipeline on any pull request, but to then merge that, or to automatically merge that into, say, the main branch, that could be a kind of a release pipeline.
Yeah. Okay. I'll have a little play around with it, and I'll let you know what I find out. Anyway, it's probably might be useful.
Yeah, no, that.
Hopefully, we'll get over to JX3 as soon as possible.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for your help, guys.
No problem.
Well, I think my kids are about to murder each other downstairs. So before that's all recorded live on YouTube, then we might have to wrap this up. That was really, really good session. Keep posting. We'll keep your eyes on the lookout for another extra meetup next week where we can celebrate the year, congratulate each other on the beta, and just have a bit more relaxed before we end for the year as well.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.